Hey everyone, this is part one of a three-part series I'm going to make regarding the Spanish-American War and the freedom of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippines, and also Hawaii and some other little islands like Guam. But I'm going to start with Cuba, and I have a book that I purchased. This is a book from 1898, and I'm going to include the preface to this book and because I really think that it's important to know the history of Cuba. So the preface is not too long, but I went ahead and threw it in Speechify to give it a consistent kind of rhythm. And if this part bores you, just skip through it till you see the coins. Enjoy. Information concerning the island of Cuba has been of an exceedingly unsatisfactory character until the searchlight of American inquiry was thrown upon it from the beginning of the War for Cuban Liberty early in 1895. Although our next-door neighbor to the south, with a perfect winter climate and a host of interesting and picturesque attractions for travelers, tourists had been comparatively few, measured by the numbers that might have been expected. All of the reasons for this were those which naturally followed the characteristic Spanish rule of the island. Publicity was not welcomed, inquiry was not welcomed, travelers were not welcomed. The cities and the accommodations they offered were in many ways far behind those of like age and size in the other countries of the globe. Railway construction and the making of highways had lagged disgracefully because the exorbitant taxes collected were looted by the officers of the government as their own spoils. No other country so near to the highways of ocean commerce and so accessible from the United States was so little known. A few travelers had journeyed to Cuba and had written books descriptive of their experiences, which were read with interest by those who had access to them. But these books were usually simply descriptive of the people, the manner of life, the scenery, and the things of surface interest. It is proverbial that Spanish rule conceals the resources of a country instead of exploiting them. The person of inquiring mind had no way in Cuba to obtain prompt information concerning the material facts of the island's wealth of resource, because the Spanish authorities themselves knew nothing about it. Spanish statistics are notoriously unreliable and incomplete. No census of Cuba worthy the name ever has been taken, and there are few schools and few sources of accurate information. With all this handicap, it was a foregone conclusion that the casual traveler should confine himself to the things that were visible and that were near to the usual paths of travelers. So until the beginning of the Cuban War for Liberty, no book could be obtained which told the things which one really cares to know. Picturesque descriptions there were more than one, of considerable interest. But the information was scattered. Demand always creates supply, even if material is scant. When the war began, the people of the United States wanted to know something of the people who were striving for their freedom, of their characteristics, their condition, and their personality. Moreover, it was an immediate necessity to know the geography of Cuba, its history, its natural conditions, its material resources, and a host of things that unite to make a comprehensive knowledge of any country. There were men who knew Cuba from years of residence there in industrial and commercial enterprises. They were drawn upon for their knowledge. Then the newspapers of the United States gave another demonstration of their unvarying enterprise and covered the points of interest in the insurrection most exhaustively. Their correspondents shared the camps of insurgent chiefs, witnessed the daring machete charges of the Cubans, saw every detail of armed life in the field. Others kept close watch of the movements of the Spanish forces in Havana and the fortified towns, as well as in the field. One was shot in action, another was macheted to death after his capture by a Spanish officer who waited only to be sure that the prisoner was an American before ordering him to death. Others were incarcerated in Morro and Cabanas fortresses and in the other Spanish prisons in Cuba, because they insisted on telling the truth to America and the world. They were the ones who told of the horrors of reconcentration under that infamous order of Captain General Weyler. They have been the real historians of Cuba. It is to all of these sources and others that the information contained in the present volume is owed. The writer takes pleasure in acknowledging the courteous permission to use salient facts contained in some volumes of merit published prior to this time. But more than all, the obligation is to the newspaper correspondents who worked with him in Cuba in the days when the war was but an insurrection, and afterward when the insurrection became our own war against Spain, for the liberty of Cuba. They are the ones who have gathered the most exhaustive information on the whole subject of Cuban affairs. They have been able, by virtue of their intimate knowledge of Cuba and the Cubans, to be of invaluable assistance to the commanders of army and navy alike, not only in advice as to the forming of plans, but in executing them. One who has seen the things knows that to exaggerate the horrors of Spanish cruelty and the oppression of Spanish rule in Cuba is an impossibility. No newspaper could have printed the plain truth of a score of shocking affairs, simply because the public prints are no place for the exploiting of such tales of vicious crime against humanity as have been perpetrated. Tales have never reached the limits of the truth. It is hoped that the reader will find in this volume not only a comprehensive current history of our war with Spain for Cuba as freedom, but also much of the other matter that will be of interest and value in considering the future of the liberated island. Its history, its people, its resources, and other salient subjects are included, with certain matter on Spain and her own affairs with Puerto Rico and the Philippine Islands, which chapters serve to make the volume a work for general reference and reading on the whole subject of the war.
All right, so now the fun part, the coins. Now, I included that preface because, as you can tell, I'm a history nerd, and I love understanding the purpose of the money, and I like understanding why the money was created, why it was designed the way it was, and the symbolism of the coins. So now to the fun part. I just wanted to include that to kind of tell a whole story about Cuba before they started minting their own coins, because there were no coins under the Spanish rule minted for Cuba. So let's get into it. So before the Spanish-American War, most of the coins on Cuba would have either been Spanish coins like this 8 real. You can see this is an 8 real from 1797. This probably would have been pretty prominent on the island. But there really wasn't a lot of money going around the island until the 1800s. So before the 1500s to the 1800s, there was mostly just kind of hand trading or kind of really just stealing of the land, really. But when the Cuban people wanted a revolution, they started deciding how to mint their own coins, and they started with a paper kind of money, and I'll show some images on the screen. But with the paper pesos, I believe they were, those were minted between the 1860s and 1870s. I believe they tried to print some paper money in the 1840s. But this is a 8 real. Now, ones that would have been distributed primarily on the island would have had a counter stamp. And the counter stamp looked like a flag with some cannonballs or so. Some of the counter stamps look a little funny, so don't laugh if you see certain ones. I'll try to put some on the screen. But this is an 8 real that would have been used. It might have been counter stamped or not. And they had half reals, they had 1 reals, and 4 reals, 2 reals. And real is a Spanish word for royal. So if you ever wondered why all their money is real, that's what it meant, royal. And there were some Mexican coins that were circulating on the island before the Spanish-American War. And you can see this is a 1901 Mexican peso, but there were pesos from the 1800s and from 1890s to till present. They were called pesos. Before that, they were called 8 reals, but they were minted for Mexico. And a lot of the ones before the 1820s, before Mexico won their independence, would have looked just like this. This is actually a Mexican coin. You see, it says Spain, but it has. You see, this is one that was minted for Mexico, and you can tell it's for Mexico because of the mint mark. So these are both Mexican coins, and they would have circulated around Cuba before the 1840s and even until the Spanish-American War, maybe a little afterwards. And they would have been planned or they would have been counter-stamped. It really just depended on what they wanted to do with them, because there was some trades between the 1800s. But most of it was to the United States, somewhere to Spain, somewhere to Britain, and but a lot of the kind of day-to-day life in Cuba would have been just kind of barter trade and kind of small stuff. So you can see here, this is a un peso, a 1 peso from 1882. This might have made it on the island. It might not have. but I wouldn't rule out. So this one is from the Philippines. This one's from Spain, and you can see it has the same portrait, and they're just one is looking the other way and one flips the other way. It's just how kind of Spain determined uh, their coins between Philippines, which Philippines was the only territory who got their own coin minted. Everything else would have just been Spain. But these would have been circulated around then if they made it from the Philippines and back. And you can see like the Mexican coins; those would have been prevalent as well around that time. But it was probably mainly Spanish and Mexican coins. There would have been near the end, near right before the Spanish-American War, where you would have seen U.S. coins, and those are probably most likely counter-stamped. So you can see, I'll put up some images of some U.S. coins that might have been counter-stamped, but right before the Spanish-American War, there was a big push for the U.S. to get involved on both sides because it was pretty miserable what was going on in Cuba and Puerto Rico as well. And the United States being so close, I mean, just there is a real push for the United States just to kind of take over the island. But the main difference between Puerto Rico and Cuba is Cuba really wanted their own country. They really wanted their own independence. They didn't want to be owned by a different country, and that's why with the Spanish-American War, the outcome was that so that Cuba would remain its own independent country, partially ruled with the Platt Agreement, where the United States could kind of overwatch and kind of control what happened in the government, but Cuba would operate as their own independent country. So in 1915, the United States started minting coins for Cuba. So I have a bunch here. As you can see, I collect a lot of Cuban coins. So you had the 1 centavo, and they loosely based this on the United States currency. So this is kind of loosely based on a penny. It doesn't look like it. And then you had a 2 cents. And you can really tell in the silver coins. So this is a 5 centavo. I think I have a few of these 5 centavos. But in 1881, Cuba connected their local currency, the peso then, to the United States dollar. So 10 cents was 10 cents, 50 cents was 50 cents, a dollar was a dollar. So you'll see that later on as I go on. But these were all minted in the United States for Cuba. So Cuba didn't mint them, but they designed them and had part of the design. So you can see this is a 5 centavo. I have another 5 centavo. Here is a 10 centavo, which is equal to a U.S. dime. You can see I really like collecting the silver coins, and that's where all world coins. You'll see most of my collection is silver. But the Cuba coins are just beautiful. Every time I see them, I buy them. And I've sold a lot of them. I had a complete 1916 set, which is one of the most rarest dates, but I had to fund some other endeavors I was doing, so I sold those. I had the peso, the 40 centavo, the 20 centavo, the 10 centavo, and so on, and I sold those all as a lot. I think I sold it for like $2.50. There's a 20 centavo. Here's a 40 centavo. You would think that 1915 would be uh, the more rare of the date, but they just produced a lot of the 1915s, especially the 1 and 5 centavos. And here's a peso, which I love these. Like I said, I had a 1916. It looked identical. These coins pretty much looked exactly identical from 1915 to 1949. And I'll get to that. So this peso is just beautiful. This is probably one coin I don't think I would ever sell. I think I bought this for 60, but these can go for triple that. These can go for about 180. And I've seen ones that's graded that go for 1,000. And you can see, I'll just kind of skim over these. The 1920s looked exactly the same. Exactly the same. And all the way to 1946, they looked exactly the same. And so here is a 1949, let me see, yeah, 1949 20 centavo. And you see it looks exactly the same. Now, in 1952 is where so earlier, like I said, Cuba really wanted its own independence. They really wanted to be their own country. Now, between the 1930s and 1950s, there's a lot of push. There was a lot of kind of regime changes because once the United States got in and started taking over stuff, it made the country stable and really made the country rich too. But sorry, there's a plane going over by. Okay. I live near a army reserve, which there's in an airport, not an army base, but sometimes you hear some weird things. So Cuba really wanted their own independence, and it led to some regime changes because once the United States started taking over, the people of Cuba started turning on the United States, started getting their own people in, and started mini revolutions. It started going from like a liberal regime to more of a independent regime, and eventually into a communist regime. So this was some of the last silver coins. This is really the last silver coins minted in Cuba for circulation because there was a commemorative one in 1953. So these were, you can see, these were minted in 1952. And these aren't some of the prettiest coins, but this is when Cuba was really trying to fight its own independence against the United States. So you can see a kind of change. And the next year, no more silver coins because they started going communist in 1953. So in 1959, they totally went communist. So I have some Russian rubles here, and these most likely weren't used in Cuba, but I wanted to show you a reoccurring theme. You can see right there that star right above the CCP logo. You can see it on this one too. And you can see this has Lenin on it, and you can see right there that star. Okay, so here is a 19, this is a 2002 peso, and you can see that star right in the Phrygian cap. So after 1959, you'll see a reoccurring theme of that star on the Phrygian cap and that socialist star all over their coinage. And I'll put some images of some coins through here while I'm talking, so I'll kind of mix them in. But you'll see there was coins of Che Guevara, which if you're familiar with the whole Castro regime and the communist takeover, I don't think the Che Guevara coins were meant for circulation. I think they were special. But I'll show you some other coins that could have circulated the island. Here's some more kind of common, newer Cuba coins. All right, and here's one that's kind of rare, but I wanted to show you. This might have made it on the island. This is a 10 centavo from Puerto Rico under the Spanish rule. Now, I haven't got to Puerto Rico yet, but if you know anything about Puerto Rican coins, you know that this is an extremely rare coin. Now this one's made into a hairpin, but this could have made it. And I have one that's in good right here. Here's another Puerto Rico 10 centavo. These might have made it on the island. I just want to show this off because this is one of my favorite coins of all time. All right, so some other coins that could have made it on the island. You can see this is a Spanish coin from 1894. There's a real slim chance this made it on, but it could have. So they could have kept this in their, change or probably collected it. And here's a Spanish 5 peseta, and I'll probably get into the Puerto Rico video in real detail on Alfonso the 13th because he was crowned king in 1886 when his father died prematurely. His father Alfonso the 12th died in 1885 at the age of 27 of tuberculosis. So then his mother was only 3 months pregnant, and they crowned him king. He didn't officially take the kinghood until 1904 when he turned 16. So his mother was a regent. And this coin was kind of left over on the table. This is a $5 gold coin, but this probably would have circulated close to or around or before the Spanish-American War. But this probably would have bought a lot. This probably could have bought a small hut or something in Cuba. But there was probably coins like this circulating as well. So, and I'm going to get to this tray as well. I found this tray in a thrift store, and the first thing I noticed is that it said Cuba on it. And I know from studying Cuba that not much stuff after 59 got out of Cuba. And you can see this one has the USS Maine on it. So this has to be, in to the best of my knowledge, probably pre 59. So this is probably 58 or earlier. But I use this as a coin tray. I think it's an amazing little tray. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and there is one coin that I did not talk about, and I'll put a picture on the screen right now, but it was a commemorative coin that was used to promote Cuba's freedom. So it wasn't an official coin by any country. It was a privately minted coin by the Gorham Corporation, who makes like silver plate and sterling silverware, and it was a Cuba peso, and it was made of 90% silver, and it featured the beauty pageant, a Cuban beauty pageant, Leonor Molina. Now, there's not much known about after that coin was minted about her, but someone did dig up the obituary of her. So she died, and I believe she was something like 92. I forgot, but I'll list it right here. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please stay tuned to part 2 and part 3. They'll probably come out within the next week or two. All right, please like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you guys. Bye.